Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. My name is Saeeduddin Faridi. I'm a research analyst here, and I will be your host for today's episode, where we will discuss development and development policies in the Himalayan region. The Himalayas are often referred to as the third pole because of the sheer mass of ice that the region contains. And its criticality cannot be overstated considering how it serves as a source of water for hundreds of millions or perhaps over a billion people, and the role it plays in sustaining communities that live within the region. And now we're seeing how the Himalayas are not immune to the impact of climate change and how its complex hydrology is changing. Melting glaciers are creating new lakes and reducing the water storage capacity of the region. Rivers are flooding more frequently and more violently. We have soil degradation, which is a direct consequence of urbanization and deforestation. And we're also witnessing events like glacial-lake outbursts, which are likely to grow in frequency in the coming years, according to research. These mountains also happen to be located within developing countries such as India, China, Nepal, Pakistan, and Bhutan. So the tension or the cleavage between the preservation and treatment of the fragile ecosystems and development policies emerges quite vividly in the region. And to discuss this very important theme, we are glad to be joined by Ambassador Tariq Karim, a distinguished visiting research fellow here at ISAS, who has also served previously as Bangladesh's ambassador to the United States and the High Commissioner to India. Ambassador Karim, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Saeed. Happy to be here.
I'll start off with a question which helps us set context for this conversation. And I want to talk about how critical the Himalayas are as an ecological system and to the surrounding regions and ecosystems. And perhaps you can also delve into who they are critical for and who we see as the stakeholders in this region.
Sure. I think you just in your introduction gave the points that make the Himalayas so critical to the ecosystem. As you said, it is known geographically as the third pole to environmental scientists. That's because of the sheer volume of ice mass which is in the Himalayas. We talk of the Hindu Kush Himalayas, which stretches 3,500 square kilometers from China in the east to Afghanistan in the west. They hold about 12,000 kilometers of fresh water. There are 15,000 glaciers, and in terms, if you get an idea of the comparative mass, the Swiss Alps contains only 2.2% ice compared to 17% coverage in the Himalayas. So this is massive. We have lost, according to scientific research carried out by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and ECMOD and others, in the last 30 years, the estimated loss to the ice mass is 2,000 years of accumulation. So, the ice forms very, very slowly. And 2,000 years of accumulation, we have lost that in 30 years. You can imagine how much that loss is. And you pointed out what happens if these losses occur. Who are they critical for? They are critical for the ecosystem of the area, the geographical area where about 2 billion people reside, stretching from Afghanistan in the west up to China in the east. The Himalayan glaciers feed 12 river systems, and they are the Western Himalayan rivers, the Eastern Himalayan rivers, and the Northern Himalayan rivers. We go into China. And whole of South and Southeast Asia are dependent on these waters. So in fact, the stakeholders are all the people who derive livelihoods, life, drinking water, agricultural inputs from these waters. So, if these start diminishing, there will be adverse effects on all life species. The tree lines will shift, the browning of pasture lands will take place, species extinctions will take place, and perhaps there will be a spread of invasive species, including bacteria and viruses, triggering of pandemics.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that answer. And perhaps now we can move on to what kind of challenges that you see have emerged in the region owing to climate change and how it, in a way, impacts the communities that inhabit this region and also communities wider in the regions around it.
Sure. I think here in Singapore, for instance, in the last few weeks, we have noticed quite a rise in the average temperatures, the daily temperatures above the average level. They have been above 5 to 7 degrees above average recorded temperatures. In Bangladesh, I got a report, there are about 14 degrees above normal average temperatures for this time of the year. I checked the temperatures in Kathmandu, in Sri Lanka, and surrounding in Thailand and other places. It seems the average temperature across entire South and Southeast Asia have suddenly jumped by about between 7 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. This is quite a jump. It is in Bangladesh, the schools and colleges are being given relaxed timings because of the heat wave incidences that are happening. Now, this is supposed to be spring, the advent of the monsoons in Bangladesh and much of South and Southeast Asia. And here you have instead this sort of very high temperatures, which are typically recorded around June or July. If you'll recall, the UN Secretary General last year had said that July 2023 was the hottest recorded year. I'm waiting to see what July 2024 will be like. We also have seen reports about unexpected flooding due to excessive rainfall in places as far away as Sydney in Australia, in Guangdong in China, in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. There will be other places, I'm sure. Now, I attribute all of these changes to the climate change from global warming. And, the Himalayas, along with the oceans comprise 71% of the planet's surface. So the Himalayas, the oceans, along with the forestry and forest green cover, they regulate the global climate because they are part of one integrated ecosystem, planetary ecosystem. When you fiddle around with one system in one place, it affects the system everywhere else. That is how the new challenges are occurring. Let me add one more thing. It will
Uh-huh.
affect the development plans of many countries. I mean, Bangladesh is a deltaic country, okay? So if the rivers start drying up or the waters are erratic in flow, and that could well happen when China, which is the uppermost upstream country, followed by India and others, start taking protective measures and holding the waters or diverting the waters, then people downstreams are going to suffer. And our very ambitious, Delta 2100 plan or the more short-term climate prosperity plan 41 are going to come crashing down.
Those sound like really alarming numbers, and the picture that paints for not just the region in Asia but globally.
Mm-hmm.
But if we sort of bring focus back to the Himalayas, and so in order to demonstrate how local communities are coping with the impact of climate change, we've seen flooding, we've seen more frequent landslides. So, with things evolving within the region, maybe you can shed light on what are the kind of issues that have emerged and how the local communities within the region are coping with it.
You see, we've seen reports, particularly in the higher reaches of the Himalayas, where mountain people typically one of their livelihoods is from yak herding. Okay. And yak herding provides them with everything that, let's say, cattle or dairy farming does in the plains and the lowlands. It's very similar. And because I mentioned browning of the surface of the Earth's surface, the browning of pasture lands basically means the disappearance of the fodder on which the yaks sustain. And if they don't have feed, then of course the yaks start dying, and that is precisely a problem faced by many of the yak herders in the immediate vicinity of the Himalayan glaciers where they live. Um, how are they coping? I don't know. Very poorly, I imagine, unless they get large government handouts or handouts from development agencies trying to help them. Uh, Basically, uh, it will depend on the policies that governments take. They will either have to think about preserving these pasture lands so the farmers can continue with their occupation or moving them elsewhere. And I'm not aware that anything of that scale is happening. Um, it's, the problem is even within a national sphere, I would say this is something which is a post World War II phenomenon when we created or we accepted the Westphalian paradigm of nation states as the defining unit for the state system that came into effect then. In a sense, it resulted in many partitions. It resulted in partitions of communities. It resulted in partitions of formally integrated states. And I would argue it has also resulted in partitions of regions which at one time had interacted as a holistic unit. And worst of all, it resulted in the partitions of the ecosphere, the rivers, the forestry, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, everything. And this caused a major upset in the way the integrated ecosystem worked because the ecology and the ecosystem do not follow the Westphalian paradigm of rule setting. They follow a natural law which enables them to interact with each other and balance things out. And because we adopted this partition mindset, we also went into the realm of extreme nationalisms, defining a sovereignty and sovereign space, which extended to resource nationalism, meaning that common resources, which are commons, and by commons I mean rivers, forestry, etc., they were also partitioned. And you can't do that. You can't manage a system like that.
I think you bring in an interesting point here with the kind of role the government plays and how borders and boundaries sort of add to the complication of how this matter is treated. And there can be a lot that can be said about how climate policies are made, even nationally, and often these are at the national levels with a top-down approach, while it has seems to be demonstrably better to have sustainability policies being made at a more smaller unit level. So perhaps maybe you would want to give us an insight into how development policies in the region can be improved to make them more mindful of local ecologies and ecosystems.
Well, yes, as you said, a lot of the politics, basically, as you know, said all politics is local, right? So the local, you can keep localizing it from the macro level to the very micro level. That is how state systems are operating. Within countries, they have provinces or districts, and within districts, they have different branches of different departments. Problem is, everybody is working in silos. Let us say, a department for environmental affairs at the district level is not sharing information with the one at the national level. And similarly, the one at the national level may or may not, largely they do not, share information with other departments nearby. That is how the fragmentation of the management of the ecosystem has happened. So I would say the first thing to do is, can we, as different states, we are all sovereign nation states, accepted, that's not going to be changed, but can we eschew the mindsets of applying the Westphalian border system and the tenets of resource nationalism when addressing ecologically related issues? In other words, we have to acknowledge that actions of everyone anywhere affects everyone everywhere insofar as climate and ecology is concerned. As I said, ecologies and ecosystems do not recognize or follow Westphalian laws. In the mid 2005, when I was studying and teaching ecological security in the University of Maryland, the big problem worrying the world at that time was the effects of the ozone layer depleting and global heating taking place. And the professor in the class I was attending said, look, imagine Mr. Ozone Layer, who is 15 to 30 kilometers in the atmosphere above the surface of the Earth. He is being bombarded by these emissions which are hurting him. He doesn't care where these emissions are coming from. So there was a big debate going on who is emitting more and who is emitting less. That is irrelevant to Mr. Ozone Layer up there 15 to 30 kilometers above the surface of the planet. He's hurting, and at a certain point, when he hurts too much, he says, ouch, and he just lashes out indiscriminately. In other words, at that point of time, who is the major culprit in the contribution of global warming and who is less doesn't matter. We all get affected. I think that is what we have to understand. And I do not see much of that happening yet, sadly.
Absolutely. The issues of climate change transcend political boundaries. And
Correct.
when we talk about it in the context of the South Asian region, there is conversation about how countries can cooperate in within these domains of policy. So, how do you see regional cooperation playing out in the climate action domain and in creating more effective policies, perhaps, for the protection of Himalayan communities and local ecologies and at the wider level? And perhaps you can also appraise us of what kind of progress has been made and what's in store for the future.
Yeah, I see if recognition, glimmers of recognition of the problem, but I do not yet see any remarkable change in the methodology of addressing these problems. People understand that, okay, we all have to do something or the other, but I think it has not yet resulted in the greater coordination and synergizing of policies amongst the governments in the region. For instance, if we are talking about glacier melt, say by the middle of this century, coming to a point where we will first have uh, big outbursts of glacial dams bursting their banks and wiping out nearby towns in their path. And then when the fresh water stored there disappears, then you will have a trickle coming. And what happens after that, after mid-century, that is around after 2050? I don't think we are doing this anticipatory thinking or working together to see how we address it. A, if that is going to happen, and I think I described in one of my talks or papers somewhere, we all know that we are sitting in an airplane and it's going to crash into the hillside. What are we trying to desperately? Are we going to bail out? Are we going to try and fly above the hills or what? We still don't know what to do. And I think, we have to adopt regional rather than national policies. Or if we have national policies, how do we synergize them with the national policies of countries around us? Because the water bodies we share are shared water bodies. They don't recognize borders. They flow in from somewhere above your borders and flow out from somewhere below your borders. Are we doing something to preserve the water that we have? Because 60% or more of the water that flows in the rivers basically fizzle out into the sea and join salt water. What do you do to preserve the fresh water that you need for sustenance of your life and living? So I don't see much of that happening. We could even harness the waters for clean energy, but that's also not happening. I mean, the northeastern part of SARC, the South Asian subcontinent, we could easily have 200 gigabytes or more of hydropower generating if we wanted to cooperate. But the movement towards that cooperation is glacial in progress. It takes 10 years for an idea to first be accepted. I don't know how long it will take for that idea to be operationalized. So we need to do all this sort of things to forestall the problems that we are going to face. I think we need to have regional bodies with some degree, more than less, autonomy in terms of water resources management and water security, in terms of generating energy security, and for infrastructure development, which affects that. We need something for food security for the region, not just national wise. We need health security measures to be put in place so that pandemics or epidemics cannot spread across the border. I mean, there are multiple fallouts from this. All these are non-traditional security issues. But there is a famous theory in environmental science that ecological degradation in combination with depleted resources is very likely to translate into human conflicts at the local level. And the local level disruption is not going to remain local, it will spread beyond the borders. So that is how then it comes to a point where non-traditional security actually translates into traditional security threats. And I think all governments and peoples need to look at it from that broader aspect.
You raised some really important points in your final answer, but unfortunately, we only have so much time for this episode. Perhaps another time we can pick up this conversation again to delve deeper into these really insightful points that you brought up. Ambassador Karim, thank you so much for joining us today and for having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. You can learn more about our work by visiting us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates on our research and publications through social media. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.